Welcome to a new episode. This is episode 18 of the MAYCO Friends build, or the skateboard design build. Today we are going to be focusing on the front suspension with the cantilever or pushrod setup. As you've seen in the previous video, I've finalized the packaging for now, and that means that I have all the hard points, also all the hard points for the suspension. In this video you'll see me design the basic layout for the street driving suspension. I will also try and get a little bit of the drift setup for the front suspension in. And I also made a little mistake, and for those of you who know what I'm talking about, put it in the comments. I will correct it in this video, so in the end you'll know it. But yeah, so let's get started. Of course, in the previous models you already seen that I use suspension parts, so all the heim joints and those things I have already drawn in. So from previous models I just select the parts, drag them into my assembly and start assembling all the heim joints. That's the first task. Then I start to design the individual weld parts for the lower suspension. The wishbone for the bottom and the wishbone for the top should be exactly the same. I experimented with a design where I have the heim joint, the rear heim joint, at an angle and let it go directly into the triangle of the A-arm at the bottom. Sadly, the angle of the heim joint was too big and it could not work, so I had to go for the system that you'll see me use in this setup, where I have first a piece of straight and then I go off at an angle towards basically the front part of the A-arm. So as I mentioned, I draw in all the individual parts that need to be welded together, and I assemble them in welding assembly basically. And I took a nice color for it for now, just as a little bit of fun. What you'll see me do is I have inserts which are threaded. So I have a 25mm, or let's say an inch, of round tube that I use for the basic parts of the suspension, and I insert basically threaded bushing, and I have a small chamfer on it of 45 degrees so I can weld into that. And also when you look at the wish bar, at the steel parts where the bushing is inserted into it, there are slots on the outside which also allow me to weld the outside basically. So then that's a good tight fit. And I keep in mind that between all the mating surfaces there is enough space to weld around it, and that I can reach it with the torch as well. I did make a new cantilever yeah, point, yeah, that it fits better with the car. I used the 45-degree angle on the top of the chassis to mount the basically the cantilever part of the suspension to, and that also helps me direct the push rod of that suspension onto the wishbone. I think that the angles are now much better, and again I used the damper setup from the previous model, and yeah, that's basically for now enough. This system that I have on the car right now should also have rebound adjustment and hardness adjustment. Yeah, what the eventual setup will have, we need to determine at a later stage, but for now this is sufficient. I also modeled in the disc brake and everything that goes with it. I didn't have a caliper before, so it was a tight squeeze to get the caliper in. This is just a dummy model of the caliper that I will be using. The caliper that I actually will be using is a caliper of Peugeot 106, I believe, or 206 or 205, no 205 I think, 205 or 106, something like that. It's at least an older model Peugeot, and it has a front disc brake of only 10mm thick, and that's perfect for my car, so I can keep the brake system light and have a very simple system. I will also use that brake for the hydro, but for the rear parking brake I need to figure out something else. Yeah, but that will come in the future. I hope you enjoyed this video of me designing the front suspension geometry. The basic geometry I did in the packaging videos. To give you an example of what I did, I have 1 degree camber, 5 degrees caster, 0.1 degree toe in, and a KPI angle of 11 degrees if I'm correct. And yeah, that's basically, and of course Ackerman going through the center of the rear axle. Steering arm, I have about 125mm of the rear, and the steering column, or not the housing of the steering system, I have it placed a little bit closer to the center of the front axle, so that my steering arms are a little bit longer, so that I can most likely run a little bit more angle on the steering system, or have a little bit more aggressive steering system. Yeah, so that's something that needs to be tested. So for the drift setup of the front suspension, I currently have a little bit more camber, and I went for toe out instead of toe in. Normally on a road car, generally the rule of thumb is to have toe in a little bit, and I believe that on most race cars you go for toe out because you get a much more responsive front steering geometry. So yeah, that's so a little bit more camber, that's obvious, and yeah, a little bit more toe out, so that yeah, a better steering response. So now let's go to my little mistake. The little mistake that I made was basically that I didn't put the Heim joints on the outside of the A-arm correct. I put them horizontally, which for rear suspension is fine, but for the front suspension you want to mount them vertically so that you can steer. Yep, small mistake, big consequences. So I corrected that. I positioned the arms themselves horizontally and both equal distance away from the center of the wheel in driving position. And in driving position, I always take in mind, or keep in mind, that the tire actually sinks a little bit into the pavement or is squatted a little bit, because the tire is of course dynamic. So it's the loaded wheel radius that I use for this. Looking at all the parts now in place, I might extend the wishbones just a little bit, because I think with my hub design I can tuck the suspension in the hub a little bit more inwards, inside the wheel basically. And yeah, I hope that will work, and then it just fine-tunes the steering of the car a little bit. Yeah. So I hope that yeah, that's maybe something I will do for in next video, but then just all the parts need to be along a little bit further, and I need to have a little bit more detail. So what I actually want to do is buy a hub, and then I can draw it in very detailed, and use that model for reference, and then I can start with the hub design a little bit more in detail. That will be in the next video. So I hope you like this video. If you do, give it a thumbs up. If you want to follow me, you can do that by clicking subscribe button. Thank you for watching. Please leave a comment, and see you in the next one. Thank you. Bye bye.